All right, everyone. We're going to start getting started as we've clocked over the hour. We'll give people just 1 minute to join, but as we wait for our final participants, I'll start to introduce myself. I am Stefan Bird Kruger. I lead the data strategy team at Parsons TKO. Just a brief background about Parsons TKO. We are a consultancy that works in the mission-driven sector. We specialize in a philosophy and methodology we've developed called engagement architecture. Engagement architecture is what helps organizations successfully engage their audiences with the combination of technology, people, processes, the content they produce. So thinking about all of those factors holistically, that's what our organization is about. And then the data strategy team in particular, we help organizations use data as a strategic asset in driving that engagement and helping organizations, mission-driven organizations in particular, succeed in that mission. So that's a little bit of the background. As everyone's joining, you will see that we've got microphones and cameras turned off today. I'm going to be leading us through the content and the exercises, but at the same time, we do have the chat open. So please feel free to put your thoughts, questions in there, and we'll do our best to keep up with those throughout the webinar. I will also just comment this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed after the session. And so you'll be able to look back and catch up on anything that we may have gone over quickly. And so you will have a chance to go back and also to share this with colleagues after the fact. So that's a bit of the background. And with that, I think we'll start diving into the content of the webinar. So first and foremost, this is our data strategy evaluation workshop. And in particular, this is a self-assessment workshop. We are going to talk through big, important concepts in data strategy, but really this is for each of you individually. I want you each to see yourselves, to see your organizations in the concepts and the content that we talked through today. And I really want you to be reflective and think about where are your strengths, where are your opportunities for growth. So this very much is meant to be about each and every one of you, even as we talk about all of this collectively as a whole. So in order to understand in a bit more detail what we're going to be going through, we're already in the first 10 minutes, some introductions. We're going to talk through a few key concepts, things that we will be referencing throughout the workshop. But the heart of this is going to be this sort of middle 40 minutes where we are going to do a walkthrough of major requirements of a successful data strategy and also a self-assessment. So you'll see over there on the right side, we've got a picture of a form. In a couple minutes, we're going to send you a link through the chat here in Zoom to that form. Our hope is that you will use that to follow along with the concept. As we go through the walkthrough and the self-assessment phase, we are actually going to take periodic breaks. So for each of there are 4 major sections. Each of those 4 major sections, we're going to give you a few minutes to think about what we've talked about and actually work through this form together. And hopefully the questions that we ask you in that form will help spur ideas, help you sort of consider how these ideas relate to your own work in your own organizations. We'll have just a few minutes at the end for closing remarks, and then we do hope to wrap up pretty promptly by the end of the hour. I do want to announce, sort of, wasn't on the invite, but we have reserved 30 minutes after this webinar concludes, where we will have me in a separate room for office hours. So anyone who has questions that come up, things that you came in to hear wanting to ask about that we don't get to in the main session, I will be there. Please feel free to stick around and join me in that room, and we can talk through whatever came up during the workshop. So that is the overview. I just want to talk a little bit going back to the concept I introduced before, engagement architecture. We see data strategy, we see data as a discipline that supports your overall efforts to successfully engage your audience. Engagement architecture is our comprehensive philosophy and methodology for how we consider everything that it takes to successfully engage your audiences. It's driven by your strategy, But in order to actually activate and follow through with what you hope to do with your audiences, it's a combination of the people, the platforms, the processes that all drive your organization. It's how you produce your content. It's how you get it in front of people's eyes. Um, all of that creates the capabilities that allow you to have the outreach and allow you to have the engagement that makes you successful in your mission, whether you're in communications or development or government relations, whatever your role in an organization. If you're talking to people, you need some combination of these things. And of course, data exists and flows through all of those components, and it relates to all of those components. And in turn, we want to see data feed back into each of these components in order to improve the way your organization works and improve those outcomes. Just expanding on that a little bit, we also recognize that the specific set of tools, the specific set of goals, the specific set of activities, and what you need from data also vary pretty significantly from place to place within an organization. So we see sort of at the top level, you've got folks like external partners, leadership, and board that are often more in a consuming data role. They are people who need to be given distilled insights. And their needs, their expectations, how they want to interact with data is going to be pretty different from a lot of folks sort of in that middle layer, comms, fundraising, operations, that tend to be more producers of data. And hopefully also consumers. They're hopefully also using their own data that they produce. But with the number of touch points that happen in that layer, you have these enormous volumes of data that can be produced and collected. So all of that is going to give you a huge set of resources when it comes to data. But certainly, last but certainly not least, we also see that data is very varied in the way it's used at a programmatic level. So you can think about teams doing research, advocacy, direct service, all of those different use cases within an organization really can be extremely different in the types of data, whether it's internal data, often external data, using government data. And so there's lots of different ways that data can come into and then be used within an organization. So as we get started in the exercise, I want to encourage you all to think for yourselves. What are you trying to affect in your organization with data strategy? What is it that brought you here? Are you thinking about your own role? What do you want to individually be doing with your data? Are you responsible for a team, or are you on a team and trying to help the rest of your colleagues change the way they work with data, interact with data, and leverage data as a resource? Or are you at the stage of thinking more holistically? How does the entire organization relate to and use data? So as we talk through all of this, I invite you to use your own lens, think about the ways in which these thoughts are relevant. And as you answer questions in the workshop, please feel free to just interpret them in a way that's appropriate for yourself. Ultimately, we want each of you to see your own needs in the way we talk about this. So I'm kind of curious actually as we get started. So we're gonna throw up a quick poll, and I'd like to see how you are all thinking about this. So as you think about your data strategy today, which of those levels of strategy are you considering? So we'll have this up for a couple seconds. All right. And we've got the results here. Okay, so it looks like a bit of a mix. About half of you have a team level mindset in terms of what you're looking for, but there's also a lot of organization-wide interest, and then also a handful who are thinking about their own individual roles and responsibilities. So I'm going to use this a little bit to sort of color the way I talk about data, but knowing that we've got a wide range here, I'll try to cater to all audiences as much as I can. All right, so just to get us started, we are going to, and I think we maybe already have, put the link into the Zoom chat. So if you click that link, you will get the form that pops up. This is the form that's going to help guide you individually and going to help you capture details and thoughts about your own digital and data strategy. And we want you guys to use this and follow along as we go. As we go into the main section of the workshop, you'll see it's broken into four requirements, four groups of requirements that we're going to talk through. Each of those relates to a page within the form. So we invite you to follow along, but please go at your own pace. If you want to skip ahead, that's fine. If you feel like we're moving faster and you want to give the form more time to think through, that's fine too. It's okay to skip ones that are slowing you down and skip them entirely, come back to them as you like. I will say, if you find some of these questions hard to answer, ask yourself why. I think there's probably a lesson in there in terms of what you might want to focus on to gain more confidence, more clarity about the state of your data strategy. I will note there's some text boxes in there and throughout. Those are for you. Use them as you will. Feel free to come back to them. The responses to these forms will remain editable. So if you come back to this an hour later and you'll have the link, you'll be emailed the link afterwards. So you should be able to come back and you can keep adding, keep refining, see what you thought about your data strategy during the workshop. So that is that's the intro there. And please, as we go, if anything is unclear, don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat. So jumping in, the anatomy of data strategy. When we think about data strategy and what it takes to have a successful data strategy as an organization, these are the main requirements, the main features, the main phases. There's all kinds of ways to think about them and talk about them, but ultimately you need to have a clear strategy, clearly defined strategy, the thing that you want to measure. You need to have the tools, technology in order to gather the data that you need in order to do the analysis and produce the reporting that lets you get answers about the strategy that you're trying to affect, enact, or push forward. And then last but certainly not least, there is the adoption phase. And so that's the one where your team, your organization, your external stakeholders who you're trying to influence with data, that's where they actually pick up what you produced and use it on a day-to-day basis, change the way they think, change the way they make decisions. If any one of these is broken, your data strategy will be ineffective. And so it really takes the combination of all four of these for things to work well. So these are the four sections that we're going to talk through in the workshop and that the questions in the self-assessment relate to. So focusing on the first one, strategy and definition. This is often referred to as a theory of change. So it's the collection of ideas and the collection of activities that you use in order to make a difference in the world. A lot of it should flow down from the mission organizationally. What are you trying to accomplish? But then putting that in an audience engagement context, when you communicate to people, you are communicating to get them to do something, get them to think something. What are the definitions of engagement? What are the definitions of success and impact when you think about your outreach and the way you communicate with external audiences or internal audiences? And that's a big part of what you want to be able to model and be able to measure with data. In all of that process, everything from your staff, the things that you produce, the technology that you use to get it out there, the outlets and user experiences that people have when they encounter your content, and whether or not that drives them to the intended actions. All of that needs to be very well understood in order to measure it. And so having that detailed clarity of your approach to audience engagement is really essential. And so I think that's going to be the first step there, is making sure that you have that clarity that you can use and reference throughout the rest of your work with data. And your strategy needs to acknowledge each of those elements, but also you need to be able to see the alternatives. And so when we're using data, we're often trying to figure out what's the best thing for me to do. And so that means you need to know what are the alternatives to what I'm doing. And so being able to understand your strategy, but then also see the points where things could be different, and then be able to bring those into tests. And so what are your hypotheses? Do you have hypotheses about how and whether what you're currently doing works? Do you have hypotheses about what could be different, things that you want to be able to test? And importantly, those things need to be verifiable. You need to be able to invalidate your hypotheses in order for them to be useful when you're testing with data. And so this stage, the strategy definition stage, is crucially important. So that's a bit of the background there. We're going to take a short break right now and put on our nice lobby music so that you guys can think about this, look in the form, and work through those questions and think about whether your strategy is already in a measurable state, something that can be used in data strategy. All right, we're going to wrap up in about 1 minute and then move on to the next section. So finish your thoughts, and it's okay if you wanted to spend more time, you can always come back to it. All right, and we are going to move on to the next section, but think about everything that you just answered in the form. Think about the concepts, because this strategy, your audience engagement strategy, are really the brains of your overall data strategy. these are the concepts that we are going to be referencing. These are the concepts that you want to be able to measure. And so we're gonna think about these things again, even as we talk about the next and the rest of the phases and requirements of a successful data strategy. So the next one that I want to spend a little time on is tracking, collecting data, accessing data. The data that you need, the data that you are going to use to do your analysis, report out, have people make decisions based on, you got to get it somehow. And so this is a big one that most people think about when they think about analytics is, okay, I just got to get the data. You know, a lot of people's first impulse is, okay, Google Analytics, going to put it on the website and I'm done. And that's really, it's a very important step. You have to have the data, you have to get the data. So getting those tools in place is incredibly important, but there's a little bit more to that. And so some of the things that we want to focus on when we think about collecting and tracking data is making sure that you are collecting it from each of the platforms in your experience, in your audience engagement, and your engagement architecture. And so that really requires that sort of nuanced understanding of your audience's journey. Yes, they will come to your website, and Google Analytics is very good at collecting the data from there. It's one of the most common analytics tools in our sector. But there's more to it. They come to your website from somewhere. And so are you capturing the data about where they came from? Are you being able to connect those dots and think about how they came in and out? Once they're on the site, are you able to collect the things that they do, how they interact with the site, and where they go from the site? Our websites are often not the end of our audience engagement journeys. They're often something that gets people to the next spot, whether that's donating, whether that's signing up for something, whether that's just engaging with the content and becoming longer term thought leaders of whatever it is that you publish content about. There is a longer story that goes after that. And so thinking about that whole journey and imagining all of the touch points, all of the technologies that people encounter along the way. Being able to do that is how you make your data that you collect relevant. And that is the point at which you have the most power to ensure that your data is relevant. So a lot of the work that we do focuses on changing the way data collection works. Google Analytics was not built for us. It was not built for the mission-driven sector. It was built first and foremost with e-commerce in mind. And there's a degree of that in our work, but it needs to be taught what our mission is. It needs to be taught what we're trying to accomplish. And that's true for Google Analytics, and the same is true in almost any data ecosystem that we work in. So there's a lot of thought that goes into really refining and making sure that our tracking is relevant. And I alluded to it before, but the idea that you need to be able to connect these dots from place to place as you go through your whole audience experience is really crucial to being able to tell those cohesive stories. How did somebody begin their relationship with your organization, and how does that correlate to or impact the overall story arc? How does that correlate to their end state and all the touch points along the way? So being able to see the same concepts, say perhaps an audience, how do legislators meet us and then engage with us, and then how does that result in long-term relationships, all the way down to individuals. Can we tell if the same person first heard about us and met our brand in this one place and then made it all the way to becoming a brand ambassador and a volunteer? So that ability to track the same concepts across your different data sets is really powerful and is the root of a lot of data capabilities that you can manifest in your data strategy. All of this implies that there's work to be done to make sure that your tracking is fully functional, up to date, doesn't break, and when it breaks, it can be fixed. And that does mean having the ability to make changes to your data, to make changes to the way you track. So there is also a staffing question in here. Do you have the data talent that you need in order to monitor, maintain, and update your tracking? Particularly because our strategies tend to change. Our goals change. Each campaign that comes up often has a different or slightly nuanced outcome in mind. And what we are good at, which parts of our strategy are going well, also often change. I know some of you, coming into this workshop had questions about KPIs, and I think that's a big piece of this as well, is being able to know that what you are measuring is what you are trying to change. And that often means changing what data you focus on. And so that can come all the way back to how you collect it. We'll touch on that concept again in the later sections. But I think all of that matters. Do you have the ability to control the data that you are collecting and make sure that it's relevant to your work? So those are some of the major concepts here. We're going to go into another short break, and I want you all to focus on the next page of your form. All right, so now we have our data. Now we focus on what do we do with it. So this is where we start to think about the process of getting tables and databases into the right format that people can use them in order to change the organization, change the way we work, drive at impact, however that looks in your organization. This is the voodoo of data. This is the part of the process that gives data scientists the sort of cultural role that they have as wizards. But in the end, it comes down to a mix. It comes down to a mix of subject matter expertise and a sort of a data spelunking mindset. And I think that can be a lot more attainable. And again, depending on how the data came to you, it can be more or less difficult. You think about the tools that you have, things like Google Analytics, things like your social media platforms' own insights dashboards. They already do a lot of the work for you to sort of take the data, start making it more visual. And so depending on what data you're working with, the actual task here can be more or less complex. And often it just means going in and looking at those dashboards, looking at the reports, and bringing your own context, bringing your own experience, your own expertise in the work that you do, knowing the audiences that you're trying to understand, and interpreting those things. So how do we take it out of its original form and put it into the right format? And I think most importantly, give it the right context. How do we use that data to tell a story about our work, about our impact, and the ability to make a difference with that? So I really feel strongly in analytics and data strategy, and I think especially in our sector, data needs context. And those of us who are in the role and have the responsibility of reporting on, analyzing and reporting on our data, I think it is up to us, and by us I mean you, it is up to us collectively to create a narrative. So using data for storytelling is a very popular concept and often comes up in a external, we are out there trying to change the world context, but I think it is just as, if not more important internally. How do you give your analysts the mandate to be opinionated in the way that they interpret data? And I think that kind of opinionated stance is really, really important in the next stage, which we'll come back to. But being able to give somebody truly an answer to their questions, and being able to, even if it's the wrong answer, having that starting point for a conversation about, well, what should we do? And I think the more opinionated you are, the easier it is to start that conversation. A big part of being able to have that conversation is also making sure that it's in the right format. Analytics tools, Google Analytics in particular, a lot of power, a lot of data, a lot of capabilities in the platform, but ultimately it is still a research tool. Google Analytics is not a reporting tool, it is a research tool. It is meant for somebody who knows Google Analytics, who knows what it represents, and can interpret it. So in a lot of cases, our job is to get it out of those environments and put it into a new one where it's easier to have that conversation. What that looks like will depend on your team, your organization, your culture, your standards. Sometimes it's just a Word document that you email around. Sometimes it's a live meeting where you all look at things together. Sometimes it's a dashboard that people can pop into at their own time, especially if you're a global organization dealing with multiple time zones. That's often more important. There are so many different ways that you can convert data and sort of research-minded dashboards into stakeholder-facing outputs. But that part is really crucial, and that part is really important. You cannot get to the fourth stage of adoption and optimizing your audience engagement without being able to convert it into the right formats for those conversations to happen. So that's going to be the next major step that I want you all to reflect on. And I do think, I did see a question in the chat I want to talk about just a little bit. When we think about the data that we're reporting on, it can come from a lot of places, including externally. And so when you think about things like social listening is, I think, a really good example of that. There are a lot of conversations happening out there in the world that are not your conversations. They're not ones that you started, but they're happening in a place that you can access, you can listen to, you can go out and see what people are saying about a certain concept, and then correlate that with how your own audiences are talking about that. You can sometimes find conversations, people who should be your audience, and being able to pull those together helps give your own data more context. For example, interest in this particular topic is waning, and that's not just because we're doing a bad job talking about it, but because that's a part of a trend in the world that we can go out and see. So social listening, Google Trends is a tool that really helps with that in sort of the SEO context. How are overall conversations about this topic changing? And beyond that, when you think about programmatic work in particular, there's endless sources, government data that you could pull in to help understand how your constituency is being affected by national or global trends. There's a lot of different options. Partnerships with other organizations can often help you get access to new types of data, no matter what type of work you're doing. So lots of different external sources that can help you as you get into this analysis and reporting phase. So I will stop there and we'll have a little time to reflect. All right. And then last, but perhaps most, adoption and optimization. We've done all this work. We know what we're trying to do. We know what our theory of change is. We know what our plan to impact the world is. We have done the work of tracking data about every step of that journey, all the activities that we do, all the ways in which our audiences interact with us. We now have data about it. We have thought about reporting. How do we take that data and turn it into a meaningful report? How do we turn it into a meaningful experience for our own staff to consume? Layering it in with context. This is what this data means, and this is what I think we should do about it. Now, how do we actually use that as a team to change the way we work, to change our behaviors, to introduce new strategies? One of the first questions I ask people when talking about this is, where on your calendar does your data make a difference? We are all very, very busy. We all have primary jobs for most of our organizations. We have, at best, one person whose job is data. And I would say 98% of the time, there is nobody whose job is data. And it's just something that we try to do along the way. And so I think no matter who you are, no matter what your role or responsibility is, I would encourage you, let this be your homework after this workshop, open up your calendar and show me on your calendar where you work with data. And this can be a meeting. Sometimes there's a quarterly or a weekly lunch and learn, a time when everyone gets together. But that often means that data then ends up trapped in that spot. So how do we actually make data a part of our day-to-day? And so I think this is something that I really want to drive home, is that data is at its best when it is context for the decisions that we're making. So think about your editorial planning process, one of those processes that you mapped out and defined in the very beginning, how you work, how you generate content, and think about how data appears in that process. Is there a Wednesday morning editorial meeting that you can bring data to in order to drive that conversation and use as context for the decisions that you make there? I think what's very important here is that analytics becomes accessible to everyone who works in the organization. It is not meant to be trapped away, locked away in one expert's head. And I think a metaphor I often use is data is often treated as an oracle. There's one person who just knows all the data. We would much rather have data missionaries, people who can go out and teach everyone how to incorporate data in their own work. So I think that's very important in making sure that it sort of seeps into the organization and generates what we call a culture of data. When we talk about culture of data, we are mainly thinking about this fourth and final stage. How does everyone make it a part of their experience just being in the organization to think about the organization through a data lens? How do we measure what we're doing? Do we have a sense of the roles that our work plays in changing those numbers? We mentioned KPIs before. I think this is another really important point. Every individual person should know, this is what I'm trying to do today. I'm trying to move this number in this direction or that direction. Fewer bad experiences, more good experiences, getting our audience to engage with the mission. Whatever that means, what is my part in doing it, and how do I know whether or not it's been successful? Another thing about culture of data that I think is very important, and this is a common failure point where data strategies break down and stop working, is a fear of data. And so I think having a culture of data means directly addressing that fear. Data should not be used punitively. In order for data to work well, people need to feel comfortable asking questions. They need to feel like their questions are heard, are welcomed, and that they won't be penalized for asking easy questions or hard questions. And I think in order to do that, you need to make it okay to not be able to answer questions. It needs to be very okay to say, we can't know that because we didn't prepare ourselves to know that. Because if there's that fear, if there's that fear that I'm going to get in trouble for not being successful with the data as we have it today, then people are going to start to bury it. People are going to feel like they can't make mistakes. They can't try experiments. They can't try something new that wasn't a part of the original plan. So how do we make it safe to have that sort of curiosity and the willingness to fail, but then also the willingness to adapt and the willingness to go back and make changes so that we can do better next time? I think all of that is really important to reinforcing a positive sense and a positive use of data so that everyone wants to be a part of it. How do we make it a good experience to be a part of this culture of data as opposed to a fearful one? And then last but certainly not least, let's think about the parts of our work where this data actually gets used. We need to use it to change behavior, or else it's not doing very much for us. And this is a very forgivable baseline state that people get in. analytics is none of our main jobs, and so we often just wait until the very end, and then we look back and we say, okay, well, let's look at the data. I think the first place people use analytics is in board reporting, reporting to grantees, and it is doing work there. I think that is work to help sustain the organization. Give us another grant because we were successful. So that's a perfectly effective and valid and defensible use of data, but it leaves a lot on the table. That's often a years-long cycle of using data to improve outcomes and extend the mission. But how can we do it on more of a day-to-day basis? And so that means being able to bring it in, and it often means working with data earlier. Are you just waiting until the end, or can you use data in real time to change the way your work goes, to change your activities, to change what content you choose, to change the topic of your next blog post, for example. So using it in real time, change the course of a campaign, I think is a real-time example, or using it in advance. How do we incorporate data into the planning process for our work for the next quarter? What are you gonna do? And show me in the data why you want to do that. Those are the types of roles that we'd like to see for data. So I think those are some key concepts to think about. We'll take another short break for reflection and form filling, and we'll come back for our final wrap up. All right. Well, we are reaching about the end of our scheduled time here. So we'll just talk for a few minutes to wrap up. I'm actually going to zoom back through the slides and let's go back to our overview, our overlook of data strategy. These are the major concepts that we've talked through. These are the major requirements. These are the things we've asked you to reflect on. All of these four things need to work together for the organization to be successful in their use of data, for your team to be successful. And so I think in particular, when you're thinking about strategy, think about the things that you can control. Think about the things that you are responsible for, that your team are collectively responsible for. Think about the ways in which your team members can support one another. And think about when you are designing the experiences for your audiences and how you improve them, think about where else that audience is experiencing your organization. Think about the other departments that maybe you need to start syncing up with, you know, sharing ideas, sharing lessons learned, giving heads up about how you want to change that experience because it might influence the way they also are experiencing them. Being able to bring that whole strategy together so that you know that you have the data that you need in order to evaluate how it's going, find the opportunities, but then also use that data to feed back into your work, to feed back into your process, to improve the experience. How do we use what we know about what somebody consumes on the website and on email and on social media to help give them the most appropriate conversations, to help talk about the most valuable thing to them when you're having a development, fundraising, gala, phone call, whatever you know your final later stage touch points are. So how do we bring that whole experience together? How do we bring all the data about those experiences together? And then how do we put that data into a format that your staff can use it to improve and make decisions, and how your systems, and that, you know, that's an aspect that we didn't lean on too much, but your computers, your platforms are also stakeholders, if you will. They are also things that can consume data and use that data in order to improve the way they work, to make new segmentation possible in your CRM and email marketing system. But last but certainly not least, think about how we actually use this data, activate it, make it a part of our day-to-day, make it something that people enjoy interacting with. Analytics is an opportunity, not just a responsibility. It's not just something that we should be doing because somebody told us we should be doing analytics, but it should be something that we're doing because it gives you new ideas, it gives you inspiration, it helps you do your job more joyfully and to greater effect. So those are all the concepts, and I really want you guys to look at these. You know, as you went through the worksheets, we gave you those opportunities to reflect, capture new ideas, but then also just to think about where are we struggling? Where do we think we could be doing better? And use those evaluations, use those scores that you've given yourself to think about where you want to put your energy. Where do you want to invest in technology, in your team, in your strategy in order to strive for more, accomplish more with data?